Hi everybody, I'm Rick Beato. In today's episode, I want to start by thanking all the people that send me incredibly great emails and messages on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, and to my email every day. This has been really an incredible experience over the past 6 months of making these videos. Just want to thank everybody for being there and indulging me in these videos. I was talking to a good friend of mine tonight, and he reminded me of a story that he tells his students about me, actually, and it's a story that I left out of my bio when I did my video on it, because I didn't really want to get into it at that time, and but I think it's important to tell this story because I know that there's a lot of young musicians. Well, there's all different age musicians that watch this channel and are so gracious to take their time out in their day to watch some of these videos. And this was a really important part of my musical. What shaped me as a musician, this one experience that transpired over the course of almost a year or so. I was a senior in high school, and I was a really bad student all the way from junior high on. I tell people this; they are always amazed by this, but I was a D- student. I mean, really, I was a really bad test taker. I failed a lot of classes, or I would just barely pass them. A D- is like, we always did number grades, 65. I think I graduated with a 66 average from high school. I took 1 year of math. I took sciences, but I played in the orchestra. That was my thing, and I played sports. And I ran track, and I played basketball and baseball earlier, but when I was in high school, I was really good in track. I was good I was a very fast runner, and I could jump, and that was kind of what I did, and playing in a rock band. But I got hooked on playing jazz when I was about 16 or so, and started taking jazz guitar lessons, like I'd said in my earlier video. But one of the things I didn't talk about is going to college for music. And this is a story that my siblings don't even know. I've got 6 siblings, and they have never heard this story. But I didn't know what I wanted to do for college. I know I wanted to go to school for music, but I didn't. And I wanted to go to school for guitar, but I didn't know how to do that. So I started looking up, asking some friends that I knew were going to school for music, and I picked 2 colleges to audition for. One was Fredonia State University in upstate New York, and one was Ithaca College, which is also in upstate New York. I'm from Rochester, so these were very close colleges. And I got the audition requirements. So this is 1980, the beginning of 1980. So both of them had very similar requirements. I wanted to be in the jazz program. Both of them had jazz programs really before any other colleges around did. I mean, Berkeley had a jazz program, but in upstate New York, those were the 2 places you could go to get a degree in jazz guitar. So anyways, I looked up the audition requirements for both places, and they were very similar. You had to play 3 pieces from 3 different style periods. That would mean like a Renaissance piece, a Baroque piece, and a Romantic era piece, for example, or a 20th century era piece. And you had to play the Segovia scales. Well, I read the audition requirements, and I brought them into my guitar teacher. Now, my guitar teacher, Glenn, at the time, he didn't really play classical guitar, and he thought he could prepare me for these auditions. So I grew some nails on my right hand to play classical guitar, and I started learning these pieces. It was 3 Bach pieces out of a Mel Bay book. Well, these were just simplified versions of these pieces, which I didn't realize, and my teacher didn't realize this. It was played a Bach prelude and some Bach fugue, but they were very simplified and incorrect. So anyways, I go into my first audition at Fredonia. I go with some friends. We ride together there that were also doing auditions. And the guitar professor wasn't there. There was a violin professor that was sitting there with a big reel-to-reel tape machine. So he says, okay, what are you going to play? I said, oh, I'm going to play this Bach Prelude in D minor. So I play the piece. He's just sitting there writing some notes. He's a violin professor. He doesn't know. They're recording it for the guitar teacher that's not there. So I play my pieces. He doesn't say much. He says, well, now it says you're supposed to play the Segovia scales. And I say, well, what are those? And he says, well, I don't know. He said, I think they're just 3-octave major and minor scales. So I said, oh, I can play a 3-octave major and minor scale. So I said, how about G major? So I play a G major scale, 3 octaves. Anyway, so I leave there, and the guy doesn't say much, and I don't think much of it. I thought, it went pretty well. And then a week later, I go to audition at Ithaca College. And when I get there, my dad drives me there, and I'm wearing a suit with a tie. And I go in, and I meet the guitar professor. And you had to take some other tests, and there was like an orientation style thing where they get, the dean talks to students, potential students there. And I go to that, and my dad listens with me, and then he goes down, and my dad waits outside the room, the professor's office. And I go in to play, and I start playing. He said, what are you auditioning for? And I said, I want to be in the jazz guitar department. Okay, well, let me hear your classical pieces. So I start playing this Bach piece, and he says to me, what is that? What is that arrangement? I said, it's Mel Bay arrangement. He said, well, that's completely wrong. That's not how the piece goes, and that's the wrong arrangement. What else do you have? And he was really agitated. So by that time, I was incredibly nervous. So I said, oh, I've got this other piece by Scarlatti. And he says, well, that's the same style period. Well, play it. So I play it, and he said, where did you get that arrangement? And I said, well, I learned it off a Julian Bream album. And he said, you learned a classical guitar piece off a record? I said, yeah. He goes, well, that's not from the right style period. That's not from a different style period. Do you know anything from a different style period other than the Baroque? And I said, I have another Bach piece. He says, well, I don't want to hear that. I said, well, I really want to get into the jazz program. He says, and by this time I'm just drenched in sweat. I'm so nervous. This guy was really didn't want to be there and couldn't believe that he had to be sitting there for this kid that isn't doing the audition requirements correctly. So he says, well, what can you play? Can you play a standard? And nothing would come to mind. I couldn't think of anything to play because I was so nervous. So I said, well, how about a blues? Or he says, how about a blues? I said, sure. And he says, what key? And I say, A. Well, nobody plays jazz in A. They don't play jazz blues in A. And I couldn't think of a melody to play. Just my mind was blank. So he goes over to the piano to accompany me. He didn't even accompany me on guitar. And he starts plunking out an A blues, and I'm trying to improvise over it. And it's just terrible. And he stops, and he kind of laughs. He says, okay, thank you. So I walk out of the office, and my dad's there, and he says, how did it go? I said, okay, I guess. I'm not really sure. So a couple of weeks go by, and the mailman comes to the house, and I see these envelopes. I go to get the mail. I mean, I'm 18. I'm a senior in high school. This is March of 1980. And I got both letters. So I open them. I don't run in and tell my mom. No, my parents weren't home. And I opened both letters. And they're both rejection letters. Ithaca was like, no, you didn't pass the audition. And your grades aren't good enough to get in. Fredonia, you didn't pass the audition, but there was a letter from the track coach in there. And the track coach, they were the Division III, the number one Division III track school in the country at the time. And the track coach said, had a note in there, if you want to run track, you can get in. You can't be a music major. You have to pick a different major, but we can give you a scholarship for track. So I said, yes, I would do it. I got in touch with the track coach. I said, yes, I'll come there. And then I lied to everyone, and I told them that I got into school for music. And this lie went on for years. It's gone on for so long that, I mean, I've told friends of mine, but none of my siblings know. I've forgotten about it. It was so long ago. We're talking 37 years ago now. So fast forward, I practice all summer on my jazz guitar, and then I'm determined to get into school for music, even though I go to Fredonia as a history major. So I started as a history major, and the first day I get to school, I go to the guitar professor, Joanne Castellano, her name was. And I asked her, I said, I want to get in the music program. And she says, well, I don't have time to teach you. Okay. So I have no way to learn classical guitar. Then I check Ithaca College's requirements when they're doing their next auditions, and I decide I'm going to go re-audition at Ithaca in October. This is August now. So there was a freshman guitar student at Fredonia, and his name was Phil Sasso. Big guy, probably 6'5" or so. And he was a phenomenal classical guitarist. His teacher was a guitarist named Benjamin Verder. He was a fantastic classical guitarist who was not known at the time, really. So I told Phil about this, and he said, I'll teach you classical guitar. This is another freshman. So he taught me a Villa-Lobos etude in E minor. He taught me about 5 pieces. He showed me how to hold my hand correctly, everything, what I was doing wrong. He showed me the Segovia scales, and I practiced hours a day while I was doing my freshman history major studies. I decided on being a history major, and I started running with a track team. And I ran with the track team for about 3 weeks, and I quit. And the coach was like, why are you quitting? I said, well, I want to transfer to a different school and go to school for music. So anyway, so I said, I go to re-audition at Ithaca, and my parents are saying, why are you re-auditioning? You got in before, don't they? And I said, well, it's a new year, so I lied about that. It's a new year, so I have to re-audition. Now, every one of my friends at the time thought that I got into school for music, and I was going to school for music. None of them knew they didn't know that I wasn't. So anyway, so I go back to Ithaca, and I go to Steve, the guitar teacher. I go to his office again. He doesn't remember me. Now, I'd been there in February or March the year before, and it's now October. The year before, no, it's the same year. So it's 6 months later. He doesn't even remember me. And I say, I'm re-auditioning. Oh, I see you re-auditioned in the fall and you didn't get in. Okay, great. Well, okay, so what are you going to play? So I play the Villa-Lobos piece. Oh, that sounds fantastic. I play a Bach fugue. Sounds great. And I played some other piece. Wow, sounds great. How about the Segovia scales? I play those. And I said, I really want to get in the jazz department. Now, the last time I said this to him, before I played the A blues, I said that before I left, I said, I have a lot of natural ability, and I can do this if you give me a chance. I had said that to Steve before I left the first time. So he said, well, what are you going to play? What jazz tune are you going to play? I said, I'm going to play All the Things You Are. So I start playing, and so I said, no, you don't need to accompany me. I'll just play solo guitar. So I start playing the Joe Pass version of Virtuoso. Steve didn't realize it was Joe Pass. He just thought I sounded a lot like Joe Pass. He didn't realize I was actually note for note playing the Virtuoso solo guitar version of All the Things You Are that I'd figure out by ear. So he tells me, you're in. So I go back to Fredonia, and I tell people I'm going to school in the spring in Ithaca. So I transfer in January. And I get there, and there's a bunch of other classical guitarists or jazz guitar players that are in the program that I knew I was as good or way better than. But they, some of them had parents who had connections. Some of them had, for whatever reasons, they got into the school the first time without, they passed the audition when they couldn't really play this stuff. They just couldn't. I was a much better guitar player than they were, but I couldn't follow the rules for what the audition requirements were. So the first week of school, I decide I'm going to go talk to the bass teacher because I was first chair in the orchestra in my high school orchestra on bass. And I came to realize had I auditioned on bass, I would have gotten into both schools because I was a very good bass player. And I went and played for the bass teacher, Henry Newbert, and he said, great, you're in. Why don't you be a music ed bass major? You can be a double major on the guitar, but you should be a classical bass music ed major. I said, great, that's what I'm going to do. So I studied jazz guitar with Steve Brown, and then I studied classical bass with Henry Newbert, but classical bass was my major. So I set out as a bass major freshman year and I'm taking jazz guitar with Steve. So I start practicing, and I'm practicing all the time. And the first summer comes around, and I'm practicing 10 hours a day. And then I come back, and I'm just much, much better. I mean, dramatically improving all the time. And in my junior year, I was good enough that Steve, who didn't let me into school, asked me to play a duo gig with him. It was in Elmira, New York, which was about 45 minutes from Ithaca. So we get in the car, we drive to this thing, and people are saying, the other students are saying, I can't believe Steve's playing a gig that you're playing with Steve. He's never played with another student before. This is unbelievable. So I get on this gig, and we're playing duo stuff, and we take the first break. We're sitting at the bar, and I say to him, Steve, I want to tell you a story. So I proceed to tell Steve this story, which he can't even believe that he didn't let me into the school. Not only did he not let me into the school, but I was so depressed about not getting in that I almost quit playing because I was so humiliated at the idea that my ego could not handle the fact that I couldn't get into college in either place. I mean, it was really unbearable, but it would not deter me. And he couldn't believe that was true. So fast forward, I played many gigs with Steve after that, and I go on to New England Conservatory, and I spend two years there. And then I get an offer to come back and teach at Ithaca College. This is in the fall of 1987. So in 1980, I failed the audition to get into the college, and in 1987, a year before I started writing my Beato book there, I was not only good enough to get into college, I was good enough to be a professor there. And I got a desk in the same office as Steve, teaching in the same office that I got rejected from college in, and that was my office. So that story was a huge, huge learning experience in my life. And the humiliation that I felt at the time, I turned into, I was so resolute that I was going to not let anything keep me from being as great of a musician as I could be. And I was going to try as hard as I could to learn everything that I could. So that's my story about that I've never really told many people. There's probably 5 people or so in the world that know that story, that know me. But that was a monumental thing that happened in my life musically and just personally. And like I said, I've got 6 other siblings, and I've never told them this story. I mean, at this point, I just forget about it. It wasn't until my friend Tom reminded me earlier tonight about it. And I said, I'm going to tell that story because that was a really important story to me. And for any of you out there that are thinking about giving up ever, anything can happen if you work hard enough. That's all for now. I'm Rick Beato. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being here.